We spoke during the summit that you were hosting. The situation on the battlefield was as it was then. What is your immediate reaction to President Putin's seeming escalation?
I think that we are entering in a new stage of the conflict, which is the one that the aggressor realized that he's losing the war. So in my opinion, what we have to do is to stick together and of course to send all our solidarity to the Ukrainian people.
Why do you think that he thinks he's losing the war? Does he understand it, or you think that's obvious because of the call-up?
Well, I think it's obvious because of the development of the war. Second, because he's now trying to hide this invasion, this illegal invasion of Ukraine with these referendums in the Donbass. And the message of the international community, especially the European Union, is crystal clear. We condemn and we reject the outcome of this illegal referendum in Ukraine.
Let's say they do take place. Yeah. What actually can you do to hold Russia or those Russian...
Not to recognize internationally the result of the referenda. And of course, never forget what is the origin, the causes of this war, which was to undermine the international order based on rules, to put into question the territorial integrity of the third country, which is Ukraine, and of course its national sovereignty. So the solution of this conflict is easy, theoretically, which is, you have to leave Ukraine, the soldiers, the military presence from Russia in Ukraine. But indeed, I think that we are witnessing a new stage of the conflict.
And what will the new stage look like? Because clearly in his speech, Vladimir Putin talked about reservists, didn't call for a general mobilization, did not call for a draft. I don't know how you read that.
And he doesn't recognize that he is in war. Domestically, I mean. No? So I think that if we see the development of the war over the past months, in the first stage, what he tried to do is to occupy all the country. Second, he tried to have a government not so ruled by Zelensky and his party. And now he's concentrated his efforts in this region of Donbass. So I think that it is important to keep the unity, to condemn with the strongest terms all this annexational referendum, and of course to tell Putin that of course we're not going to recognize at the international scale and of course at the European scale the outcome of this referendum.
So the NATO chief called it a strategic failure, or this whole invasion and war by Putin, and yet you've described in others the fact that he knows that he's in real difficulty on the battlefield. I don't know whether you think his back is against the wall, but when you are having your discussions about a new stage of the war and how to react, do you feel that he's at a point where he may lash out in a way that's unconventional, or what?
Well, I think that he doesn't have a clear strategy of the war. That is why I think it's important to be prudent and to keep that unity that I mentioned before, and of course to send all our solidarity, humanitarian solidarity and also military capabilities to the Ukrainian forces in order to reject the aggressor. So, we're in the United Nations. We have to remember always that he's trying to blow up the international order based on rules. And one of the main principles of the UN Charter is the respect to territorial integrity and national sovereignty, which is, trying to undermine, in this case, the aggressor, Putin.
I quoted quite a few critics, really, who say that this building behind me, which was, created in 45 or so, precisely to get the world out of war and to construct a peaceful future, and by and large, to a great extent, it's sort of succeeded. But now, one of the main members of the Permanent Five is actually violating the charter by invading a country. How on earth does this kind of organization, therefore, solve this when you need unanimity in the Security Council?
Well, first of all, I think that we need to reform profoundly the UN Security Council and the UN system. And this is something that the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been very vocal over the last years. And of course, it's failed. And second, nowadays, with all the global challenges that we're suffering, the pandemic, the war, the climate change that you mentioned before, it is important to have a multilateral approach to these global challenges. Take into consideration all the lessons that we took from the pandemic. We had in 1 year and a half, not one, but 40 vaccines against COVID-19. So the main lesson is that if we take multilateral approaches to these global challenges, the outcome is positive for the human race.
Do you have a specific idea of how to reform the UN and the Security Council to unparalyze it, if you like?
I think that we need to be prudent and, not to be ambitious in all the goals that we need to reach in the short term, but go step by step. 2 years ago, many leaders of the globe, we convened a 4-hour, we tried to propose reforms to make more effective the UN system. So for instance, take into consideration all these SDRs and the international
That's
finance.
sustainable development, yeah.
Yes, for the medium and the low income countries. So, I think that step by step we can do things to make more effective the multilateral system. But of course, what we cannot accept and we cannot tolerate, and we have to keep always in mind, is that there's a country that is fighting for its freedom and its future, and there is an aggressor which is, trying to blow up all the international order based on rules.
So in light of what Putin said last night about upping the number of troops that he thinks he's going to send to Ukraine, the Ukrainian government has said now our Western partners have to match that threat and have to up their help to us. And we know that you've given a lot. But we also know that the United States and others are holding back on perhaps some longer range artillery, for instance. Certainly no aircraft to match what Putin's aircraft are doing on the ground there. And they say that we actually, now that we're doing well, we need even more to help us push him back, which is your goal. Why is now not the time to give them more of what they need on the battlefield?
I think that we are answering to the requests of the Ukrainian government. Of course, I cannot speak from the US administration, but I can speak from our responsibilities at European level and also at national level. In my case, as Prime Minister of Spain, we already exported around 400 tons of military equipment. We are financing with 200 million euros, which is a huge amount for Spanish budget, the European Peace Facility, which is, the fund that the European Union is channeling to help with military equipment the Ukrainian forces. And of course, we are also channeling financial aid to the Ukrainian government, pledging around 250 million euros. For the Spanish economy, this is a big effort. But at the end of the day, all the European Union, and I would say the international community, is showing that solidarity with the one who's suffering the aggression. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, because many times we speak about the consequences of this terrible war. Food crisis, energy prices, but we cannot forget that what is at stake is the international order based on rules.
Right. That's why I asked the question, because for instance, Germany, we understand, has not yet, and we don't know whether will, send the heavy tanks that they had promised. We know that France sends a fraction of what other nations are sending, and nothing succeeds so much as success. So you've seen what the Ukrainians can do with what they've been given, and I would assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that would encourage your own populations in these times of hardship to keep backing the Ukrainians. So why not double down?
Our populations are, backing governments in helping.
Crisis, cost of living, inflation.
Yes, of course. And this is very important to keep in mind, that all these consequences are due to a political actor, which is, in this case, Vladimir Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. And of course, we've been very vocal within the European Union and also in the international arena, that we need not to use this excuse of the energy crisis to postpone our duties and our homework with climate change.
Right.
So what we need to do is to align the responses to this energy crisis to a major crisis, which is climate change. This is what we're doing in Spain. We are, passing plans to save energy. We started to do so at the beginning of August. And of course, we are speeding up the process of the green transition and the renewal. Just to give you some figures, in 4 years, it was 8 times more the presence of renewable energy in the Spanish economy. So, we are speeding up the process and not, using this excuse to postpone this major challenge.
There have been some complaints, you've probably seen, that there is a major roundtable meant to be attended by heads of government and state on climate here at the UN today, but President Biden's not going, President Macron's not going, even though they both declare climate as an existential crisis. Are you going? And if not, why not?
Well, the heads of states and the heads of government, they have many agendas and bilateral meetings. And of course, yesterday, for instance, we had a very important summit on food crisis. But I cannot speak about the agenda of other leaders, but I do believe that President Macron and President Biden, they're very committed with the Paris Agreement and the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And at the end of the day, as I've said before, it is important to have a multilateral approach to these global challenges. Of course, to coordinate all these efforts. And finally, which is important for the medium-income countries and also low-income countries, is to provide them financial instruments. I think that we had a very good news from the IMF with this new creation of the Resilience and Sustainability Fund that will channel resources to these countries in order to make their economies much more resilient with climate change.
In your countries and others in Northern Europe, in the global North, you've seen the emergence of some very hard and far-right parties.
Yes.
In Sweden, they've had a significant victory, may very well do so in Italy over the weekend. These are parties with roots in, Mussolini's party, in the Nazis, and all the rest of it. You have a very extreme party, Vox, in your own country. What can you all do to mitigate their influence? And surely all of this stuff is contributing, not dealing with the war and all its crises. It's contributing to the anxiety that brings the far right to power.
Polarization benefits the extremes, and of course the far right is profiting from this polarization of the public debate at national level and also at international level. But take, for instance, the example of Sweden. I think it's a very interesting example to explain what I would like to share with you. The Social Democrats won the elections, 30%. The second political party was the far right, 20%. 10 points ahead, Social Democrats from the second party. The third political party were the central right, so-called moderates. And then there was another liberal party with a minor result. So the outcome of this election will be that the third party, in votes, will lead the government with the support of the liberals and the far right. So I think that the question to be answered is by the center-right parties in Europe. What kind of relation are they going to have with the far right?
Do you think that the far right being in politics will lower the EU sort of ambitions when it comes to cracking down on Russia because of the pain it's giving all day?
It is indeed a risk.
It's a risk.
Indeed a risk. There are, this is public. There are links from different political parties from the right, far right in Europe with Putin and his party. And at the end of the day, what the far right parties want is to blow up global consensus, gender equality, climate change, peace,
LGBTQ.
And I think it is important to tell the center-right parties in Europe what kind of relations are you going to have with the far right. Because what it is not acceptable, at least from my side, is that the third political party in Sweden is going to rule the government when the first political party, the Social Democrats, they won by far,
Yeah.
the elections in a week ago. So, of course, it is acceptable because, the parliamentary game is
Yeah.
like that. But politically,
Yeah.
I think that the question is to the center right and the liberals. I mean, they prefer to, to form a government with the far right and not with social democrats.
We'll see how it goes.